Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling one of the most foundational, high-stakes passages in the entire biblical narrative. We're in Deuteronomy chapter 30.
We are. We're looking at the final, really powerful sermons of Moses. You have to picture the scene. The Israelites are right there, poised on the edge of the promised land, and they're about to renew their covenant with God. This whole section, verses 1 through 20, is sort of Moses' ultimate summary of their destiny.
And when you say high stakes, we're talking about cosmic high stakes. Moses lays out two absolute destinies for you, for the listener, right here in the text. Life and prosperity, death and destruction. That's the choice.
That really is the core of it. What's so fascinating is that while this specific passage doesn't use the words we might expect, like heaven or hell,
Right, they're not there.
they're not.
Hmm.
But scholars argue this is one of the earliest, clearest places in the Bible where the whole concept of two final distinct destinations for humanity, total blessing or complete destruction, is laid completely bare. It really formalizes the stakes.
So our mission today is to get under the surface of that choice. We want to understand this profound narrative tension Moses creates by putting this ultimatum out there, while at the same time dropping these key foreshadowings that suggest the choice is, well, way more complicated than just obey and live.
And that tension is really a setup for the entire biblical story that follows. We should probably start with that fundamental paradox, because it's not just a literary thing. It's baked right into the structure of the covenant.
Right. I mean, Deuteronomy is framed as a covenant renewal.
Yeah.
And if you look at the lead up, like in chapters 27 and 28, the results of obedience are just. They're spelled out meticulously. If people live with integrity, with justice, the blessings are immense. Prosperity, being brought back to their land, all of it.
But the alternative is genuinely terrifying. If they disobey, if they break the covenant, they face what the text calls these ferocious curses. And we're talking about destruction, exile, being scattered among the nations. It's so severe that Don Carson, he commented that Deuteronomy 28, where these curses are detailed, is maybe the most fearsome chapter in all the Bible.
Yeah.
You can't just skim it. The consequences are just overwhelming.
The intensity of those curses, the sheer scale of the devastation, it's so high that it actually led some early scholars to question the authorship of the book itself. This is where we hit that scholarly conflict, isn't it?
What's fascinating here is exactly that. You have scholars like F.M. Cross, who looked at the document and, well, he basically said, this text has contradictory views of God. One person couldn't have written this.
How so? What was the contradiction?
He saw the blessings as being incredibly gracious, almost unconditional. God says, I will restore you because I am merciful. But then the curses are completely ferocious and absolutely conditional. If you disobey, you are destroyed.
So his thinking was, what, two different authors?
Yeah, that was his conclusion. He thought maybe an earlier, more optimistic editor writing, during a time of national hope, before any disaster, wrote the blessings. Then a later editor, maybe after the Babylonian exile, looked back and thought the original was, quote, way too optimistic, and then inserted the terrible curses to explain why everything went so wrong.
Like two different documents just jammed together.
Exactly. But the counterargument is that this tension isn't clumsy editing. It's completely intentional. The Bible is presenting a God who is perfectly good in two ways that seem opposite to us. On the one hand, he's a God of absolute justice and holiness. Exodus 34 says he cannot clear the guilty. Every sin, every infraction has to be addressed.
It has to be. Otherwise, the universe just descends into moral chaos. If evil has no consequence, then goodness doesn't mean anything.
Precisely. But at the exact same moment, he is a God of endless love, faithfulness, and profound forgiveness who desperately wants reconciliation with us. And this is the ultimate contradiction. It's maybe best explained with the analogy of a good judge.
Okay, let's slow down on that because this feels like the core tension Moses is setting up. Why does a good judge have to punish?
Because if a judge is truly good, they can't let wrongdoing go unpunished. I mean, if a judge sees a terrible crime and just says, I forgive you, you're free to go, that's a bad judge. He's undermined the whole system of justice. He's failed the victims. So God must punish sin precisely because he is good. His holiness demands it.
But then, if he's also this God of comprehensive love, he wants to forgive the very person his justice demands he punish.
That is the paradox. A perfectly moral God must punish, but a perfectly loving God wants to forgive. How can one being be completely good in justice and completely good in love without one canceling out the other? That unresolved tension is the narrative engine for the whole biblical story. It makes you look for some kind of outside solution.
And Deuteronomy 30 starts giving us hints of that solution through these three key predictions Moses makes. But the first one is just. It's a punch to the gut. It's the certainty of human failure.
Here's where it gets really interesting. After Moses lays out this magnificent vision for justice and community and integrity through the whole book, he wraps up his sermons by essentially saying, and you are absolutely going to fail.
It's just the ultimate downer ending to an inspirational speech.
Look at verse 1 of chapter 30. He predicts the worst curse, exile, dispersal will happen. He says, when all these blessings and curses I've set before you come on you, and you take them to heart wherever the Lord your God disperses you. He's not saying if you fail. He's predicting the worst case scenario is a certainty because they won't keep the covenant.
I have to push back a little. Why give a message of life and hope and then immediately say, but you're going to fail miserably? Isn't that totally counterproductive? Doesn't that just give people an excuse to not even try?
It feels like terrible motivational speaking, absolutely. But the argument is that it's profound preaching because it confronts the core problem of the human condition. Moses is telling the people, and by extension, he's telling you and me, you know what you want to do, the law is clear, and you still won't do it. You don't have the internal power.
This sounds a lot like that question from the secular philosopher Jacob Needleman in his book, Why Can't We Be Good? His whole thesis was that the biggest mystery of the human race is that we know how we should live, but nobody seems to have the strength to do it. We know the destination, but we can't and won't drive there.
That gap, that inability to get from the ideal to the action, is exactly what Moses is highlighting. It's like the counseling conundrum. I remember an anecdote about a Harvard counseling class where the professor gives this case study of a deeply angry man who just would not forgive his mother. The students suggested all these different psychological techniques, and finally the professor stopped them. He said, if you guys are looking for a truly changed heart, you are looking in the wrong department.
So psychology can show you what you ought to do. It can diagnose why you aren't doing it, but it can't give you the power, the moral engine to actually change your core desires.
And recognizing that internal bankruptcy is the whole point. Francis Schaeffer had this brilliant illustration for it. He said, imagine you're wearing an invisible voice recorder that only picks up every time you say to someone else, you ought to do this, or that was wrong. It just records your own moral standards you apply to others.
So on Judgment Day, God doesn't judge you by some impossible external standard, but by the very standards you apply to everyone else.
Exactly. And Schaeffer's point was, no person on earth could pass that test. The human problem isn't a lack of information. We have the law. It's a lack of power, a fundamental inability to meet even our own benchmark. Moses is setting up the problem to point to the need for outside help.
Which sets us up perfectly for the second foreshadowing, which is much more hopeful. God promises to perform the necessary internal surgery.
Yes. Even after predicting total failure in exile, Moses promises the ultimate reversal in verse 6. He says, the Lord your God will circumcise your hearts, so that you may love him with all your heart and with all your soul and live. This is the foundational promise of the new covenant. You see it echoed all through Jeremiah and Ezekiel.
Okay, before we get into the circumcision part, we need to be clear on what the biblical writers mean by heart. It's so much more than just feelings or emotions. Right?
Oh, much more. The biblical heart is the control center of your whole being. It's the seat of your trust, the source of your inclinations, the place where your ultimate treasure is. Proverbs 3 says, trust in the Lord with all your heart. It's the engine that drives your mind, your emotions, your will. It determines what you truly love.
Which makes me think of that really powerful observation from Archbishop William Temple. Your religion is what you do with your solitude.
That's such a profound statement. It means your true devotion, your true God, is revealed in those quiet moments. When you're just standing in a long line or sitting quietly without your phone, where does your heart automatically go? If it's instantly to work or money or what other people think of you, well, that shows you what you're really relying on for your salvation. That's where your heart is set.
So the mind and the will are really just servants of the heart. If the heart desires something, the mind will find a way to justify it. But if the heart itself is corrupted, then all the knowledge in the world, like the law Moses just gave them, is useless.
That's the key takeaway from the failure prediction. So now, the metaphor, a circumcised heart. Craigie, the scholar, suggested this sounds like God performing surgery, and that makes sense. Physical circumcision was the external, bloody, painful sign of being in the covenant community, an act of obedience.
So heart circumcision is the internal version of that. It's a transformation of your inner desire.
Precisely. It's the inner love motivation. It's the surgery that changes what you fundamentally want. It's the difference between doing something out of reluctant duty versus doing it out of profound desire.
That's a huge distinction. Like in a relationship, if your partner asks you to change something and you do it because you love them, you don't think of it as submitting to their will. You want to do it. It's an act of desire.
That's the perfect analogy. A circumcised heart is when those two things finally align. What you most ought to do and what you most want to do become the same thing. God promises to change the internal engine so that love, not obligation, is the driving force.
There's that beautiful line from the John Newton hymn that just captures this perfectly.
Our pleasure and our duty, though opposite before, since we have seen his beauty, are joined apart no more.
Yeah.
That is the definition of a circumcised heart. Duty becomes your choice because your desire has been completely reset.
So how is this internal heart-changing surgery connected to something so ancient and gory as physical circumcision? This has to bring us to the resolution of the tension, because the metaphor is pretty violent.
It is violent, and the violence is the whole point. You have to remember how old covenants worked. When God made a covenant with Abraham, they literally cut animals in half. They were acting out the curse. They were saying, "May I be cut to pieces like this animal if I break this oath." The penalty for breaking the covenant is to be cut off.
To be cut off from the community, cut off from life, from God's presence, that's the ultimate penalty for sin.
And physical circumcision, as a bloody cutting, symbolized that penalty. It showed the intimate, dire consequence of the curse.
And this is where the New Testament comes in and just explicitly resolves the tension that Moses sets up here in Colossians 2.
Right. Paul talks about Christians being circumcised in the circumcision of Christ. What that means is that Christ underwent the full, ultimate experience of being cut off, the cosmic severance from God that all of humanity deserved.
He didn't just get a symbolic cut. He took the total, absolute curse.
Exactly. I mean, think back to the Garden of Eden. There's a cherubim with a sword guarding the way back to the tree of life. The only way back to life is to go under that sword. And on the cross, Jesus Christ went under the sword. He took the penalty of being cut off from life. He became the curse of the law so we could be brought back into life.
So by taking that cosmic cutting off, he resolves that tension we started with. God's justice is completely satisfied because the sin was punished, and his love is completely expressed because the punishment was borne by him for us.
It satisfies both parts of God's goodness perfectly. And then subjectively, seeing that sacrifice, seeing that Christ took the curse you deserved, that is what moves you. That's what brings about the promised circumcised heart. It changes, as they say, a slave into a child and duty into choice. The sacrifice is the engine for the internal change.
Which brings us to the third and final foreshadowing. The message of the gospel itself has to go out.
Moses pivots in verses 11 through 14. He tells the Israelites the command is not too difficult for you or beyond your reach. He says, it's not up in heaven or beyond the sea, but it's very near you. It is in your mouth and in your heart.
Wait, but if Moses already predicted they will fail to keep the law, how can he immediately say the law is not too difficult? That feels like another direct contradiction.
It does, and that's the brilliant double meaning here. On one level, the present meaning, Moses is saying they have no excuse. The law is clear. Love God, love your neighbor. You don't need to go on some epic quest to find out what God wants. It's right here.
But there's a deeper meaning, the future one.
The future one, which Paul picks up in Romans 10, is that since Moses already predicted they will fail, the only word that is truly not too difficult and truly near is the word of faith, the gospel. Paul argues that trying to earn your salvation by, ascending into heaven or descending into the abyss, trying to achieve perfect righteousness on your own, is rejected because it implies that Jesus' work wasn't enough. If the solution was just trying harder, Christ wouldn't have needed to suffer that ultimate cutting off.
So the word that is in your mouth and in your heart isn't the command to perfectly execute the law, but the confession that Jesus is Lord and the belief that God raised him from the dead.
Exactly. That's the word that saves. That's the word that changes the heart. And it's the only word that won't crush you under its weight.
So what does this all mean when we wrap this up? What's the final distinction between the blessings and the curses?
It means we have to recognize that the two destinies Moses lays out are not parallel. They are not equal and opposite. And this really defies our modern sense of moral balance.
Okay, explain that. Not parallel.
If you receive the curse, if you choose destruction, if you are ultimately cut off from God, it is absolutely 100% your fault. You deserve it. That's why the ferocious curses exist. But if you receive the blessing, if you receive life, You absolutely do not deserve it. It has been accomplished for you by Christ taking your curse.
So doing the right thing, the obedience that comes from a new circumcised heart, that's the result of the blessing, not the cause of it. It's how you appropriate what Christ has earned for you. It doesn't earn it yourself.
That distinction is everything. Destruction is deserved, but life is a gift achieved through a cosmic surgery on the covenant itself.
That is a profound distinction, and it perfectly encapsulates this deep dive. The problem Moses presents in Deuteronomy 30 is never about not knowing what to do. It's about an inherent lack of power to do it. So if the only way to resolve the tension between perfect justice and perfect love was through the ultimate severance, the circumcision of Christ, and the only path to a changed heart came through seeing that sacrifice, what does that imply about the infinite depth of goodness required for true justice and true love to family coexist? That is the paradox you are invited to explore further. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.